139 But when you were praetor, how could the censor either fear the law, by which he was not bound, since he had not been created by the law, or fear your reproof for having sold what he had bought of you? Let Metellus now detain my witnesses, let him compel others to praise him, as he has attempted in many instances. Only let him do what he is doing. For whoever was treated by anyone with such insult, with so much ignominy. Every 5th year a census is taken of all Sicily. A census was taken when Pedrasses was praetor. When the 5 years had elapsed in your praetorship, a census was taken again. The next year Lucius Metellus forbids any mention to be made of your census. He says that censors must be created afresh. And in the meantime he orders the census of Pedrasses to be attended to. If an enemy of yours had done this to you, although the province would have borne it with great equanimity, still it would have seemed the severe decision of an enemy. A new friend, a voluntary relation did it. For he could not do otherwise, if he wished to retain the province in its allegiance, if he wished to live himself in safety in the province. 57-140 Are you waiting to see what these men also will decide? If he had deprived you of your office, he would have treated you with less insult, than when he abrogated and annulled the things which you had done in your office. Nor did he behave in this way in that matter alone, but he had done the same in many other matters of the greatest importance, before I arrived in Sicily. For he ordered your friends, the Palestra people, to restore his property to Heraclius the Syracusan, and the people of Didus to restore his property to Epicrates, and Appius Claudius his to his ward at Trevium. And, if Letelius had not arrived in Sicily with letters a little too soon, in less than 30 days Metellus would have annulled your whole 3 years' praetorship. 141 And, since I have spoken of that money which the censors paid to you for your statue, it seems to me that I ought not to pass over that method of raising money, which you exacted from the cities on presence of erecting statues. For I see that the sum total of that money is very large, amounting to 120,000 sesterces. This much is proved by the evidence and letters of the cities. And he admits that, and indeed he cannot say otherwise. What sort of conduct then are we to think that which he denies, when these actions which he confesses are so infamous? For what do you wish to be believed? That all that money was spent in statues? Oppose it was. Still this is by no means to be endured, that the allies should be robbed of so much money, in order that statues of a most infamous robber may be placed in every alley, where it appears scarcely possible to pass in safety. 58-142 But where in the world, or on what statues, was that enormous sum of money spent? It will be spent, you will say. Let us, forsooth, wait for the recurrence of the regular 5 years. If in this interval he has not spent it, then at last we will impeach him for embezzlement in the article of statues. He is brought before the court as a criminal on many most important charges. We see that 120,000 sesterces have been taken on this one account. If you are condemned, you will not, I presume, trouble yourself about having that money spent on statues within 5 years. If you are acquitted, who will be so insane as to attack you in 5 years' time on the subject of the statues, after you have escaped from so many and such grave charges? If, therefore, this money has not been spent as yet, and if it is evident that it will not be spent, we may understand that a plan has been found out by which he may take and appropriate to himself 120,000 sesterces at one swoop, and by which others too, if this is sanctioned by you, may take as large sums as ever they please on similar grounds. So that we shall appear not to deter men from taking money, but, as we approve of some methods of taking money, we shall seem rather to be giving decent names to the basest actions. 143 Inches truth. Suppose, for example, that Caius Verus had demanded 120,000 sesterces from the people of Cenchreae, and had taken this money from them. There would have been no doubt, I conceive, that, if that were proved, he must have been condemned. Had then? Suppose he demanded 300,000 sesterces of the same people, and compelled them to give them, and carried them off. Shall he be acquitted because it was entered in the accounts that money was given for statues? I think not. Unless, indeed, our object is to create, not an unwillingness to take money on the part of our magistrates, but a cause for giving it on the part of our allies. But if statues are a great delight to anyone, and if anyone is greatly attracted by the honor and glory of having them raised to him, still he must lay down these rules. First of all, that he must not take to his own house the money given for those purposes. Secondly, that there must be some limit to those statues. And lastly, that at all events they must not be exacted from unwilling people. 59-144 And concerning the embezzlement of the money, I ask of you whether the cities themselves were accustomed to let out contracts for erecting statues to the man who would take the contract on the best terms, or to appoint some surveyor to superintend the erection of the statues, or to pay the money to you, or to anyone whom you appointed? For the statues were erected under the superintendence of those men by whom that honor was paid to you. Am glad to hear it. But, if that money was paid to Timarchides, cease I beg of you, to pretend that you were desirous of glory and of monuments when you are detected is so evident a robbery. What then? Is there to be no limit to statues? But there must be. Indeed, consider the matter in this way. 145 The city of Syracuse, to speak of that city in preference to others, gave him a statue. T is an honor, and gave his father one. Pretty and profitable picture of affection, and gave his son one. His may be endured, for they did not hate the boy. Still how often, and for how many individuals will you take statues from the Syracusans? You accepted one to be placed in the forum. You compelled them to place one in the Senate House. You ordered them to contribute money for those statues which were to be erected at Rome. You ordered that the same men should also contribute as agriculturists. They did so. You ordered the same men also to pay their contribution to the common revenue of Sicily. Even that they did also. When one city contributed money on so many different presences, and when the other cities did the same, does not the fact itself warn you to think that some bounds must be put to this covetousness? But if no city did this of its own accord, if all of them only paid you this money for statues because they were induced to do so by your command, by fear, by force, by injury, then, O ye immortal gods, can it be doubtful to anyone, that, even if anyone were to establish a law, that it was allowable to accept money for statues, still he would also establish one, that at all events it was not allowable to extort it? 146 First, therefore, I will cite the whole of Sicily as a witness on this point. And Sicily declares to me with one voice that an immense sum of money was extorted from her by force under the name of providing statues for the deputations of all the cities, in their common petitions early all of which have arisen from your injuries. Ave inserted this demand also, that they might not for the future promise statues to any one till he had left the province. 60 There have been many praetors in Sicily. Often, in the times of our ancestors, the Sicilians have approached the Senate. Often in the memory of the present generation. But it is your praetorship that has introduced and originated a new kind of petition. 147 For what else is so strange, not only in the matter but in the very form of the petition? For other points which occur in the same petitions with reference to your injuries, are indeed novel, but still they are not urged in a novel manner. The Sicilians beg and entreat of the conscript fathers that our magistrates may henceforth sell the tents according to the law of Hero. You were the first who had sold them in a way contrary to that law. That they may not put a money value on the corn which is ordered for the public granary. This, too, is now requested for the first time on account of your 3 denarii, 20, but that kind of petition is not unprecedented. Had a charge be not taken against anyone in his absence. This has arisen from the misfortune of Spenius, and your tyranny. Will not enumerate the other points. All the demands of the Sicilians are of such a nature that they look like charges collected against you alone as a criminal. Still all these, though they refer to new injuries, preserve the ordinary form of requests. 148 But this request about the statues must seem ridiculous to the man who is not acquainted with the facts and with the meaning of it. For they entreat that they may not be compelled to erect statues. Then? That they may not be allowed to do so. What does this mean? Do you request of me not to be allowed to do what it depends on yourself to do or not? Ask rather that no one may compel you to promise a statue, or to erect one against your will. I shall do no good, says he. For they will all deny that they compelled me to do so. If you wish for my preservation, put this violence on me, that it may be utterly illegal for me to make such a promise. It is from your praetorship that such a request as this has taken its rise. And those who employ it, intimate and openly declare that they, entirely against their will, contributed money for your statues, being compelled by fear and violence. 149 Even suppose they did not say this, still, would it not be impossible for you to avoid confessing it? See and consider what defense you are going to adopt. For then you will understand that you must confess this about the statues. 61 For I am informed that your cause is planned out in this way by your advocates, men of great ingenuity, and that you are instructed and trained by them in this way. That, as each influential and honorable man from the province of Sicily gives an energetic testimony against you, as many of the lending Sicilians have already done to a great extent, you are immediately to say to your defenders, that man is an enemy of mine because he is an agriculturist. And so, I suppose, you have it in your mind to set aside the class of agriculturists, saying that they have come with a hostile and inimical disposition towards Verres because he was a little strict in collecting the tents. The agriculturists, then, are all your enemies, all your adversaries. There is not one of them who does not wish you dead. Altogether you are admirably well off, when that order and class of men which is the most virtuous and honorable, by which both the Republic in general, and most especially the province upheld, as fixedly hostile to you. 150 However, be it so. Another time we will consider of the disposition of the agriculturalists and of their injuries. For the present I assume, what you grant me, that they are most hostile to you. You say, forsooth, on account of the tents. I grant that. I do not inquire whether they are enemies with or without reason. What then is the meaning of those gilt equestrian statues which greatly offend the feelings and eyes of the Roman people, near the temple of Vulcan? For I see an inscription on them stating that the agriculturalists had presented one of them. If they gave the statue to do you honor, they are not your enemies. Let us believe the witnesses. For then they were consulting your honor, now they are regarding their own consciences. But if they presented the statues under the compulsion of fear, you must confess that you exacted money in the province on account of statues by violence and fear. Choose whichever alternative you like. 62 151 Inches Truth I would willingly now abandon this charge about the statues, to have you admit to me, what would be most honorable to you, that the agriculturalists contributed this money for a statue to do you honor, of their own free will. Grant me this. In a moment you cut from under your feet the principal part of your defense. For then you will not be able to say that the agriculturalists were angry with and enemies to you. O singular cause. O miserable and ruinous defense. For the defendant, and he too a defendant who has been praetor in Sicily, to be unwilling to receive an admission from his accuser that the agriculturalists erected him a statue of their own free will, that they have a good opinion of him, that they are his friends, that they desire his safety. He is afraid of your believing this, for he is overwhelmed with the evidence given against him by the agriculturists. 152 I will avail myself of what is granted to me. At all events you must judge that those men, who, as he himself wishes it to be believed, are most hostile to him, did not contribute money for his honor and for his monuments of their own free will. And that this may be most easily understood, ask anyone you please of the witnesses whom I shall produce, who are witnesses from Sicily, whether a Roman citizen or a Sicilian, and one too who appears most hostile to you, who says that he has been plundered by you, whether he contributed anything in his own name to the statue. You will not find one man to deny it. In truth they all contributed. 153 Do you think then that anyone will doubt that he who ought to be most hostile to you, who has received the severest injuries from you, paid money on account of a statue to you because he was compelled by violence and authoritative command, not out of kindness and by his own free will? And I have neither counted up, nor been able to count, O judges, the amount of this money, which is very large, and which has been most shamelessly extorted from unwilling men, so as to estimate how much was extorted from agriculturists, how much from traders who trade at Syracuse, at Agrigentum, at Panormus, at Lilybaeum. Since you see by even his own confession that it was extorted from most unwilling contributors. 63 154 I come now to the cities of Sicily, in which case it is exceedingly easy to form an opinion of their inclination. Did the Sicilians also contribute against their will? It is not probable. In truth, it is evident that Caius Verus so conducted himself during his praetorship in Sicily, that, as he could not satisfy both parties, both the Sicilians and the Romans, he considered rather his duty to our allies, than his ambition, which might have prompted him to gratify the citizens. And therefore I saw him called in an inscription at Syracuse, not only the patron of that island, but also the savior of it. What a great expression is this! So great that it cannot be expressed by any single Latin word. He in truth is a savior, who has given salvation. In his name days of festival are kept at fine Varian festivalat as if it was the festival of Marcellus, but instead of the Marcellan festival, which they abolished at his command. His triumphal arch is in the forum at Syracuse, on which his son stands, naked. And he himself from horseback looks down on the province which has been stripped bare by himself. His statues are in every place, which seem to show this, that he very nearly erected as many statues at Syracuse as he had taken away from it. And even at Rome we see an inscription in his honor carved at the foot of the statues, in letters of the largest size, that were given by the community of Sicily. Why were they given? How can anyone be induced to believe that such great honors were paid to him by people against their will? 64-155 here, too, you must deliberate and consider even much more than you did in the case of the agriculturists, what you intend. It is an important matter. Do you wish the Sicilians, both in their public and private capacity, to be considered friends to you, or enemies? If enemies, what is to become of you? Whither will you flee for refuge? On what will you depend? Just now you repudiated the greater part of the agriculturists, most honorable and wealthy men, both Sicilians and Roman citizens. Now, what will you do about the Sicilian cities? Will you say that the Sicilians are friendly to you? How can you say so? They who, though they have never done such a thing in the instance of anyone else before, as to give public evidence against him, even though many men who have been praetors in that province have been condemned, and only 2, who have been prosecuted, have been acquitted, hey, I say, who now come with letters, with commissions, with public testimonies against you, while, if they were to utter a panegyric on you in behalf of their state, they would appear to do so according to their usual custom, rather than because of your deserts. When these men make a public complaint of your actions, do they not show this that your injuries have been so great that they prefer to depart from their ancient habit, rather than not speak of your habits? 156 You must, therefore, inevitably confess that the Sicilians are hostile to you, since they have addressed to the consuls petitions of the gravest moment directed against you, and have entreated me to undertake this cause, and the advocacy of their safety. Since, though they were forbidden to come by the praetor, and hindered by 4 quaestors, they still have thought every one's threats and every danger insignificant, in comparison with their safety. Since at the former pleading they gave their evidence so earnestly and so bitterly, that Hortensius said that Artemo, the deputy of Censuripa, and the witness authorized by the public council there, was an accuser, not a witness. In truth he, together with Andron, a most honorable and trustworthy man, both on account of his virtue and integrity, and also on account of his eloquence, was appointed by his fellow citizens as their deputy in order that he might be able to explain in the most intelligible and clear manner the numerous and various injuries which they have sustained from their errors. 65 The people of Melissa, of Catana, of Tindris, of Enna, of Urbita, of Agerium, of Nidum, of Segsta, gave evidence also. It is needless to enumerate them all. You know how many gave evidence, and how many things they proved at the former pleading. Now both they and the rest shall give their evidence. 157 Everyone, in short, shall be made aware of this fact in this cause, that the feelings of the Sicilians are such, that if that man be not punished, they think that they must leave their habitations and their homes and depart from Sicily, and flee to some distant land. Will you persuade us that these men contributed large sums of money to confer honor and dignity on you of their own free will? I suppose, forsooth, they who did not like you to remain in safety in your own city, wish to have memorials of your person and name in their own cities. The facts show that they wished it. For I have been for some time thinking that I was handling the argument about the inclination of the Sicilians towards you too tenderly, as to whether they were desirous to erect statues to you, or were compelled to do so. 158 What man ever lived of whom such a thing was heard as has happened to you, that his statues in his province, erected in the public places, and some of them even in the holy temples, were thrown down by force by the whole population? There have been many guilty magistrates in Asia, many in Africa, many in Spain, in Gaul, in Sardinia, many in Sicily itself, but did we ever hear such a thing as this of any of them? It is an unexampled thing, O judges, a sort of prodigy amazing the Sicilians, and among all the Greeks. I would not have believed that story about the statues, if I had not seen them myself uprooted and lying on the ground. Because it is a custom among all the Greeks to think that honors paid to men by monuments of that sort, are, to some extent, consecrated, and under the protection of the gods. 159 Therefore, when the Rhodians, almost single-handed, carried on the first war against Mithridates, and withstood all his power and his most vigorous attacks on their walls, and shores, and fleets, and they, beyond all other nations, were enemies to the king. Still, even then, at the time of imminent danger to their city, they did not touch his statue which was among them in the most frequented place in their city. Perhaps there might seem some inconsistency in preserving the effigy and image of the man, when they were striving to overthrow the man himself, but still I saw, when I was among them, that they had a religious feeling in those matters handed down to them from their ancestors, and that they argued in this way. But as to the statue, they regarded the period when it had been erected. But as to the man, they regarded the fact of his waging war against them, and being an enemy. 66 You see, therefore, that the custom and religious feeling of the Greeks, which is accustomed to defend the monuments of enemies, even at a time of actual war, could not, even in a time of profound peace, protect the statues of a praetor of the Roman people. 160 The men of Tauromenium, which is a city in Alliance 21, with us, most quiet men, who were formerly as far removed as possible from the injuries of our magistrates, owing to the protection the treaty was to them. Yet even they did not hesitate to overturn that man's statue. But when that was removed, they allowed the pedestal to remain in the forum, because they thought it would tell more strongly against him, if men knew that his statue had been thrown down by the Tauromenians, than if they thought that none had ever been erected. The men of Tindris threw down his statue in the forum, and for the same reason left the horse without a rider. at Leontini, even in that miserable and desolate city, his statue in the gymnasium was thrown down. For why should I speak of the Syracusans, when that act was not a private act of the Syracusans, but was done by them in common with all their neighboring allies, and with almost the whole province? How great a multitude, how vast a concourse of men is said to have been present when his statues were pulled down and overturned. But where was this done? In the most frequented and sacred place of the whole city. Before Serapis himself, in the very entrance and vestibule of the temple. And if Metellus had not acted with great vigor, and by his authority, and by a positive edict forbidden it, there would not have been a trace of a statue of that man left in all Sicily. 161 And I am not afraid of any of these things seeming to have been done in consequence of my arrival, much less in consequence of my instigation. All those things were done, not only before I arrived in Sicily, but before he reached Italy. While I was in Sicily, no statue was thrown down. Hear now what was done after I departed from thence. 67 The Senate of Centuripa decreed, and the people ordered, that the quaestors should issue a contract for taking down whatever statues there were of Caius Verus himself, of his father, and of his son. And that while such demolition was being executed, there should be not less than 30 senators present. Remark the soberness and dignity of that city. They neither chose that those statues should remain in their city which they themselves had given against their will, under the pressure of authority and violence. Nor the statues of that man, against whom they themselves a thing which they never did before had sent by a public vote commissions and deputies, with the most weighty testimony, to Rome. And they thought that it would be a more important thing if it seemed to have been done by public authority, than by the violence of the multitude. 162 When, in pursuance of this design, the people of Centuripa had publicly destroyed his statues, Metellus hears of it. He is very indignant. He summons before him the magistrates of Centuripa and the 10 principal citizens. He threatens them with measures of great severity, if they do not replace the statues. They report the matter to the Senate. The statues, which could do no good to his cause, are replaced. The decrees of the people of Centuripa, which had been passed concerning the statues, are not taken away. Here I can excuse some of the actors. I cannot at all excuse Metellus, a wise man, if he acts foolishly. What? Did he think it would look like a crime in Verus, if his statues were thrown down, a thing which is often done by the wind, or by some accident? There could be in such a fact as that no charge against the man, no reproof of him whence, then, does the charge and accusation arise? From the intention and will of the people by whom it was caused. 68 163 I, if Metellus had not compelled the men of Centuripa to replace the statues, should say, see, O judges, what exceeding and bitter indignation the injuries of that man have implanted in the minds of our allies and friends. When that most friendly and faithful city of Centuripa, which is connected with the Roman people by so many reciprocal good offices, that it has not only always loved our republic, but has also shown its attachment to the very name of Rome and in the person of every private individual, has decided by public resolution and by the public authority that the statues of Caius Verus ought not to exist in it. I should recite the decrees of the people of Centuripa. I should extol that city, as with the greatest truth I might. I should relate that 10,000 of those citizens, the bravest and most faithful of our allies, hath every one of the whole people resolved, that there ought to be no monument of that man in their city. I should say this if Metellus had not replaced the statues. 164 I should now wish to ask of Metellus himself, whether by his power and authority he has at all weakened my speech? I think the very same language is still appropriate. For, even if the statues were ever so much thrown down, I could not show them to you on the ground. This only statement could I use, that so wise a city had decided that the statues of Caius Verus ought to be demolished. And this argument Metellus has not taken from me. He has even given me this additional one. He has enabled me to complain, if I thought fit, that authority is exercised over our friends and allies with so much injustice, that, even in the services they do people, they are not allowed to use their own unbiased judgment. He has enabled me to entreat you to form your conjectures, how you suppose Lucius Metellus behaved to me in those matters in which he was able to injure me, when he behaved with such palpable partiality in this one in which he could be no hindrance to me. But I am not angry with Metellus, nor do I wish to rob him of his excuse which he puts forth to every one, that he did nothing spitefully nor with any especial design. 69 165 Now, therefore, it is so evident that you cannot deny it, that no statue was given to you with the goodwill of anyone. No money on account of statues, that was not squeezed out and extorted by force. And, in making that charge, I do not wish that alone to be understood, that you get money to the amount of 120,000 sesterces. But much more do I wish to have this point seen clearly, which was proved at the same time, namely, how great both is and was the hatred borne to you by the agriculturists, and by all the Sicilians. And as to this point, what your defense is to be I cannot guess. 166 Yes, the Sicilians hate me, because I did a great deal for the sake of the Roman citizens. But they too are most bitter against you, and most hostile. I have the Roman citizens for my enemies, because I defended the interests and rights of the allies. But the allies complain that they were considered and treated by you as enemies. The agriculturalists are hostile to me on account of the tents. Well, they who cultivate land untaxed and free from this impost. Why do they hate you? Why do the men of Melissa, of Centuripa, of Segesta, of Halsia hate you? What race of men, what number of men, what rank of men can you name that does not hate you, whether they be Roman citizens or Sicilians? So that even if I could not give a reason for their hating you, still I should think that the fact ought to be mentioned and that you also, O judges, ought to hate the man whom all men hate. 167 Will you dare to say, either that the agriculturists, that all the Sicilians, in short, think well of you, or that it has nothing to do with the subject what they think? You will not dare to say this, nor if you were to wish to do so would you be allowed. For those equestrian statues erected by the Sicilians, whom you affect to despise, and by the agriculturists, deprive you of the power of saying that. The statues, I mean, which a little while before you came to the city you ordered to be erected and to have inscriptions put upon them, to serve as a check to the inclinations of all your enemies and accusers. 168 For who would be troublesome to you, or who would dare to bring an action against you, when he saw statues erected to you by traders, by agriculturists, by the common voice of all Sicily? What other class of men is there in the province? 1. Therefore he is not only loved, but even honored by the whole province, and also by each separate portion of it, according to their class. Who will dare to touch this man? Can you then say that the evidence of agriculturists, of traders, and of all the Sicilians against you, ought to be no objection to you, when you hope to be able to extinguish all your unpopularity and infamy by placing their names in an inscription on your statues? Or, if you attempted to add honor to your statues by their authority, shall I not be able to corroborate my argument by the dignity of those same men? 169 Unless, perchance, in that matter, some little hope still consoles you, because you were popular among the farmers of the revenues, but I have taken care, through my diligence, that popularity should not serve, you have contrived, by your own wisdom, to show that it ought to be, an injury to you. Listen, O judges, to the whole affair in a few words. 70 In the collecting the tax on pasture lands in Sicily there is a sub-collector of the name of Lucius Carpenadius, who both for the sake of his own profit, and perhaps because he thought it for the interest of his partners, cultivated the favor of Verus to the neglect of everything else. He, while he was attending the praetor about all the markets, and never leaving him, had got into such familiarity with, and aptitude at the practice of selling Verus's decrees and decisions, and managing his other concerns, that he was considered almost a second to Marcides. 170 He was in one respect still more important, because he also lent money at usury to those who were purchasing anything of the praetor. And this usury, O judges, was such that even the profit from the other transactions was inferior to the gain obtained by it. For the money which he entered as paid to those with whom he was dealing, he entered also under the name of Verus's secretary, or of Marcides, or even under Verus's own name, as received from them. And besides that, he lent other large sums belonging to Verus, of which he made no entry at all, in his own name. 171 Originally this Carpenadius, before he had become so intimate with Verus, had often written letters to the shareholders about his unjust actions. But Cumulius, who had an agency at Syracuse, in the harbor, had also written accounts to his shareholders of many of Verus's robberies, giving instances, especially, concerning things which had been exported from Syracuse without paying the harbor dues. But the same company was farming both the harbor dues and the taxes on pasture land. And thus it happened that there were many things which we could state and produce against Verus from the letters of that company. 172 But it happened that Carpenadius, who had by this time become connected with him by the greatest intimacy, and also by community of interests, afterwards sent frequent letters to his partners, speaking of his exceeding kindness, and of his services to their common property. And in truth, as he was used to do and to decree everything which Carpenadius requested him, Carpenadius also began to write still more flaming accounts to his shareholders, in order, if possible, utterly to efface the recollection of all that he had written before. But at last, when Verus was departing, he sent letters to them, to beg them to go out in crowds to meet him and to give him thanks, and to promise zealously that they would do whatever he desired them. And the shareholders did so, according to the old custom of farmers. Not because they thought him deserving of any honor, but because they thought it was for their own interest to be thought to remember kindness, and to be grateful for it. They expressed their thanks to him, and said that Carpenadius had often sent letters to them mentioning his good offices. 71-173 When he had made answer that he had done those things gladly, and had greatly extolled the services of Carpenadius, he charges a friend of his, who at that time was the chief collector of that company, to take care diligently, and to make sure that there was nothing in any of the letters of any of the partners which could tell against his safety and reputation. Accordingly he, having got rid of the main body of the shareholders, summons the collectors of the tents, and communicates the business to them. They resolve and determine that those letters in which any attack was made on the character of Caius Verus shall be removed, and that care he taken that the business shall not by any possibility be any injury to Caius Verus. 174 If I prove that the collectors of the truths passed this resolution, if I make it evident that, according to this decree, the letters were removed, what more would you wait for? Can I produce to you any affair more absolutely decided? Can I bring before your tribunal any criminal more fully condemned? But condemned by whose judgment? By that, forsooth, of those men whom they who wish for severe tribunals think ought to decide on causes, 180 By the judgment of the farmers, whom the people is now demanding to have for judges, and concerning whom, that we may have them for judges, we at this moment see a law proposed, not by a man of our body, not by a man born of the equestrian order, not by a man of the noblest birth, 175 The collectors of the tents, that is to say, the chiefs, and, as it were, the senators of the farmers, voted that these letters should be removed out of sight. I have men, who were present, whom I can produce, to whom I will entrust this proof, most honorable and wealthy men, the very chief of the equestrian order, on whose high credit the very speech and cause of the man who has proposed this law mainly relies. They shall come before you. They shall say what they determine. Indeed, if I know the men properly, they will not speak falsely, for they were able, indeed, to put letters to their community out of sight. They have not been able to put out of sight their own good faith and conscientiousness. Therefore the Roman knights, who condemned you by their judgment, have not been willing to be condemned in the judgment of those judges. Do you now consider whether you prefer to follow their decision or their inclination? 72-176 But see now, how far the zeal of your friends, your own devices, and the inclination of those partners aid you. I will speak a little more openly, for I am not afraid of anyone thinking that I am saying this in the spirit of an accuser rather than with proper freedom. If the collectors had not removed those letters according to the resolution of the farmers of the tents, I could only say against you what I had found in those letters. But now that the resolution has been passed, and the letters have been removed, I may say whatever I can, and the judge may suspect whatever he chooses. I say that you exported from Syracuse an immense weight of gold, of silver, of ivory, of purple, much cloth from Melita, much embroidered stuff, much furniture of Delos, many Corinthian vessels, a great quantity of corn, an immense load of honey. And that on account of these things, because no port dues were paid on them, Lucius Cumulius, who was the agent in the harbor, sent letters to his partners. Does this appear a sufficiently grave charge? 177 None, I think, can be graver. What will Hortensius say in defense? Will he demand that I produce the letters of King Eulius? Will he say that a charge of the sword is worthless unless it be supported by letters? I shall cry out that the letters have been put out of the way. That by a resolution of the shareholders the proofs and evidences of his thefts have been taken from me. He must either contend that this has not been done, or he must bear the brunt of all my weapons. Do you deny that this was done? I am glad to hear that defense. I descend into the arena. For equal terms and an equal contest are before us. I will produce witnesses, and I will produce many at the same time. Since they were together when this took place, they shall be together now also. When they are examined, let them be bound not only by the obligation of their oath and regard for their character, but also by a common consciousness of the truth. 178 If it be proved that this did take place as I say it did, will you be able to say, O Hortensius, that there was nothing in those letters to hurt theirs? You not only will not say so, but you will not even be able to say this, 180 that there was not as much in them as I say there was. This then is what you have brought about by your wisdom and by your interest. That, as I said a little while ago, you have given me the greatest license for accusing, and he judges the most ample liberty to believe anything. 73 179 But though this be the case, still I will invent nothing. I will recollect that I have not taken a criminal to accuse, but that I have received clients to defend. And that you ought to hear the cause not as it might be produced by me, but as it has been brought to me. That I shall satisfy the Sicilians, if I diligently set forth what I have known myself in Sicily, and what I have heard from them. That I shall satisfy the Roman people, if I fear neither the violence nor the influence of anyone. That I shall satisfy you, if by my good faith and diligence I give you an opportunity of deciding correctly and honestly. That I shall satisfy myself, if I do not depart a hair's breadth from that course of life which I have proposed to myself. 180 Wherefore, you have no ground to fear that I will invent anything against you, you have cause even to be glad. For I shall pass over many things which I know to have been done by you, because they are either too infamous, or scarcely credible. I will only discuss this whole affair of this society. That you may now hear the truth, I will ask, was such a resolution passed? When I have ascertained that, I will ask, have the letters been removed? When that too is proved, you will understand the matter, even if I say nothing. If they who passed this resolution for his sake 180 namely, the Roman knights 180 were now also judges in his case, they would beyond all question condemn that man, concerning whom they knew that letters which laid bare his robberies had been sent to themselves, and had been removed by their own resolution. He, therefore, who must have been condemned by those Roman knights who desire everything to turn out for his interest, and who have been most kindly treated by him, can he, O judges, by any possible means or contrivance be acquitted by you. 181 And that you may not suppose that those things which have been removed out of the way, and taken from you, were all so carefully hidden, and kept so secretly, that with all the diligence which I am aware is universally expected of me nothing concerning them has been able to be arrived at or discovered, I must tell you that, whatever could by any means or contrivance be found out, has been found out, O judges. You shall see in a moment the man detected in the very act. For as I have spent a great part of my life in attending to the causes of farmers, and have paid great attention to their body, I think that I am sufficiently acquainted with their customs by experience and by intercourse with them. 74 182 Therefore, when I ascertained that the letters of the company were removed out of the way, I made a calculation of the years that man had been in Sicily. Then I inquired what was exceedingly easy to discover who during those years had been the collectors of that company, 180 inches whose care the records had been. For I was aware that it was the custom of the collectors who kept the records, when they gave them up to the new collector, to retain copies of the documents themselves. And therefore I went in the first place to Lucius Vibius, a Roman knight, a man of the highest consideration, who, I ascertained, had been collector that very year about which I particularly had to inquire. I came upon the man unexpectedly when he was thinking of other things. I investigated what I could, and inquired into everything. I found only 2 small books, which had been sent by Lucius Canullius to the shareholders from the harbor at Syracuse, in which there was entered an account of many months, and of things exported in Verus's name without having paid harbor dues. These I sealed up immediately. 183 These were documents of that sort which of all the papers of the company I was most anxious to find. But still I only found enough, O judges, to produce to you as a sample, as it were. But still, whatever is in these books, however unimportant it may seem to be, will at all events be undeniable. And by this you will be able to form your conjectures as to the rest. Read for me, I beg, this first book, and then the other. The books of Canullius are read. I do not ask now whence you got those 400 jars of honey, or such quantities of Maltese cloth, or 50 cushions for sofas or so many candelabra. 180 I do not, I say, inquire at present where you got these things. But, how you could want such a quantity of them, that I do ask. I say nothing about the honey. But what could you want with so many Maltese garments? As if you were going to dress all your friends' wives. 180 Or with so many sofa cushions? As if you were going to furnish all their villas. 75 184 As in these little books there are only the accounts of a few months, conjecture in your minds what they must have been for the whole 3 years. This is what I contend for. From these small books found in the house of one collector of the company, you can form some conjecture how great a robber that man was in that province. What a number of desires, what different ones, what countless ones he indulged. What immense sums he made not only in money, but invested also in articles of this sort. But shall be detailed to you more fully another time. At present listen to this. 185 By these exportations, of which the list was read to you, he writes that the shareholders had lost 60,000 sesterces by the 5% due on them as harbor dues at Syracuse. In a few months, therefore, as these little insignificant books show, things were stolen by the praetor and exported from one single town of the value of 1,200,000 sesterces. Think now, as the island is one which is accessible by sea on all sides, what you can suppose was exported from other places. From Agrigentum, from Lilybaeum, from Panormus, from Thermi, from Helisa, from Patina, from the other towns? And what from Messana? the place which he thought safe for his purpose above all others, 180 where he was always easy and comfortable in his mind, because he had selected the Mamertines as men to whom he could send everything which was either to be preserved carefully, or exported secretly. After these books had been found, the rest were removed and concealed more carefully. But we, that all men may see that we are acting without any ulterior motive, are content with these books which we have produced. 76-186 Now we will return to the accounts of the Society of Money Received and Paid, which they could not possibly remove honestly, and to your friend Carpenadius. We inspected at Syracuse accounts of the company made up by Carpenadius, which showed by many items that many of the men who had paid money to Verus had borrowed it of Carpenadius. That will be clearer than daylight to you, O judges, when I produce the very men who paid the money. For you will see that the times at which, as they were in danger, they bought themselves off, agree with the records of the company not only as to the years, but even as to the months. 187 While we were examining this matter thoroughly, and holding the documents actually in our hands, we see on the sudden errors of such a sort as to appear to be fresh wounds inflicted on papers. Immediately, having a suspicion of something wrong, we bent our eyes and attention on the names themselves. Money was entered as having been received from Caius Ferrudius the son of Caius, in such a way that the letters had been let stand down to the second R, all the rest was an error. A second, a third, a fourth 180 There were a great many names in the same state. As the matter was plain, so also was the abominable and scandalous worthlessness of the accounts. We began to inquire of Carpenadius who that Ferrudius was, with whom he had such extensive pecuniary dealings. The man began to hesitate, to look away, to color. Because there is a provision made by law with respect to the accounts of the farmers, forbidding their being taken to Rome. In order that the matter might be as clear and as completely proved as possible, I summoned Carpenadius before the tribunal of Metellus and produced the accounts of the company in the forum. There is a great rush of people to the place. And as the partnership existing between Carpenadius and that praetor, and his usury, were well known, all people were watching with the most eager expectation to see what was contained in the accounts. 77-188 I bring the matter before Metellus. I state to him that I have seen the accounts of the shareholders, that in these there is a long account of one Caius Ferrudius made up of many items, and that I saw, by a computation of the years and months, that this Ferrudius had had no account at all with Carpenadius, either before the arrival of Caius Verus, or after his departure. I demand that Carpenadius shall give me an answer who that Ferrudius is. Whether he is a merchant, or a broker, or an agriculturist, or a grazier. Whether he is in Sicily, or whether he has now left it. All who were in the court cried out at once that there had never been anyone in Sicily of the name of Ferrudius. I began to press the man to answer me who he was, where he was, whence he came. Why the servant of the company who made up the accounts always made a blunder in the name of Ferrudius at the same place. 189 And I made this demand, not because I thought it of any consequence that he should be compelled to answer me these things against his will, but that the robberies of one, the dishonesty of the other, and the audacity of both might be made evident to all the world. And so I leave him in the court, dumb from fear and the consciousness of his crimes, terrified out of his wits, and almost frightened to death. I take a copy of the accounts in the forum, with a great crowd of men standing round me. The most eminent men in the assembly are employed in making the copy. The letters and the errors are faithfully copied and imitated, and transferred from the accounts into books. 190 The copy was examined and compared with the original with the greatest care and diligence, and then sealed up by most honorable men. If Carpenadius would not answer me then, do you, O Verus, answer me now, who you imagine this Ferrudius, who must almost be one of your own family, to be. It is quite impossible that you should not have known a man in your own province, who, I see, was in Sicily while you were praetor, and who, I perceive from the accounts themselves, was a very wealthy man. And now, that this may not be longer in obscurity, advance into the middle. 22. Open the volume, the copy of the accounts, so that everyone may be able to see now, not the traces only of that man's avarice, but the very bed in which it lay. 78-191 You see the word Ferrudius? 180 You see the first letters untouched. You see the last part of the name, the tale of Verus, smothered in the erasure, as in the mud. The original accounts, O judges, are in exactly the same state as this copy. 180 What are you waiting for? What more do you want? You, Verus, why are you sitting there? Why do you delay? For either you must show us Ferrudius, or confess that you yourself are Ferrudius. The ancient orders are extolled, the Crassi and Antoni, because they had the skill to face the impression made by an accusation with great clearness, and to defend the causes of accused persons with eloquence. It was not, forsooth, in ability only that they surpassed those who are now employed here as counsel, but also in good fortune. No one, in those times, committed such crimes as to leave no room for any defense. No one lived in such a manner that no part of his life was free from the most extreme infamy. No one was detected in such manifest guilt, that, shameless as he had been in the action, he seemed still more shameless if he denied it. 192 But now what can Hortensius do? Can he argue against the charges of avarice by panegyrics on his client's economy? He is defending a man thoroughly profligate, thoroughly licentious, thoroughly wicked. Can he lead your attention away from this infamy and profligacy of his, and turn them into some other direction by a mention of his bravery? But a man more inactive, more lazy, one who is more a man among women, a devout woman among men, cannot be found. 180 But his manners are affable. Who is more obstinate, more rude, more arrogant? 180 But still all this is without any injury to anyone. Who has ever been more furious, more treacherous, and more cruel? With such a defendant and such a cause, what could all the Crassuses and Antoniuses in the world do? This is all they would do, as I think, O Hortensius. They would have nothing to do with the cause at all, lest by contact with the impudence of another they might lose their own characters for virtue. For they come to plead causes free and unshackled, so as not, if they did not choose to act shamelessly in defending people, to be thought ungrateful for abandoning them. Footnote Sicily had two quaestors, one for the western or Libyan district, one for the Syracusan. This is another pun on the name of Verus, from its similarity in sound to the word vero, I sweep. It was forbidden by the Roman law, as by our own, for the advocates to give evidence against his clients of matters which had come to his knowledge by confidential communication. At Rome, the praetor urbanus, in the provinces the propraetors and the proconsuls, decided whether there was reason for an action at law, and if they decided that there was, then they assigned judges to try the action. The text here is very much disputed, and is probably wholly corrupt. I have endeavored to give what is certainly the general sense intended to be conveyed, though it can scarcely be extracted from the Latin. Gravius reads, Si seculi essent, tum seiorum legibus. Printing it all in large letters, as if they were the words of a decree of errors. He was in fact his son-in-law elect. In honor of Quintus Mucius Scaevola, who had been praetor in that province, and had established a high character for lenity and incorruptibility. There is a recurrence here to depend on the word verus, abhor. The concremissum was money deposited by both parties as a security for their obeying the decision of the judge, though the same term was also employed to express the engagement by which parties agree to settle their differences by arbitration, without the intervention of the praetor. Myth, dict. And. Pages 530, v. Judex. In the month of February, as has been said before, the Senate gave audience to the deputies from foreign nations, and these deputies were accustomed to bring rich presents to the senators who favored their respective nations. Hortensius is meant here. Balbus and Silenus had been judges in the action between Cluentius and Oppianicus, which had been already mentioned, and had been convicted of corruption in that trial. The Latin is, Domo aegis emigrat, et cadeo exit, nam jam anime migrat. Emigrat has only a simple meaning. Exit is said of him who goes forth without any baggage. He then appeared migras when he plundered Sphenius of all his furniture and plate, and removed it to his own house. Erden. The Latin word is Venerius. The officers who attended on the Roman magistrate in Sicily were so called from Venus Erycina, who was the patron goddess of all the west of Sicily. A capital charge at Rome does not necessarily mean one affecting the life of the prisoner, but his status as a free citizen. A charge which involved infamia, disfranchisement, was res capitalis. Though as it is impossible to render caput when used in this sense so as to give its accurate meaning, I have been forced occasionally to render it life. To turn the pen was to erase what had been written at one end. The stylus was sharpened to a point for scratching the characters on the wax, while the other end, being flat and circular, served to render the surface of the tablet smooth again, and so to obliterate what had been written. Thus verter stylum means to erase, and hence to correct myth, dict. And in the stylus. I have in some instances translated hosps friend, and oftener still connection, though either word is far from representing adequately the idea of the Latin hosps, because, as modern manners are unacquainted with the usage, modern languages have no word to express it. The original puns on the resemblance between caelum, heaven, and caelidum, carved or chased. Athenia was a Cilician slave who had headed a revolt of slaves in Sicily, AUC 650. He was at last defeated and slain by the consul Aquilius, AUC 651. See the note on the next oration, De Re Frumentaria, for an explanation of this. And on points connected with the topic of corn, and the societies of the Publicani, see the argument of the next oration. The Foederati Civitates were those states which were connected with Rome by a treaty, Otis. The name did not include Roman colonies, or Latin colonies, or any place which had obtained the Roman civitas. They were independent states, yet under general liability to furnish a contingent for the Roman army. They were nearly all confined within the limits of Italy, though Gades, Saguntum and Massilia were exceptions, as well as Tauromenium. Vine Smith, Dict. And. Pages 427. This is said of the officers of the court who have the account in their keeping during the trial.
On the court relating to corn. A great part of the speech is occupied with charges.
Occupied with charges against bearers of extortion committed with respect to the Decurii or tents. The Decurii formed a part of the Vectigalia of the Romans, and were paid by subjects whose territory, either by conquest, or by deditio, had become the property of the state. They consisted, as the name denotes, of a tithe or tenth of the produce of the soil levied upon the cultivators, arators, or occupiers, possessors of the lands, which from being subject to this payment were called agri decumani. It appears from Cicero c. There. Act E. Libby. That Romans, on reducing Sicily to a province, allowed to the old inhabitants a continuance of their ancient rights, and that, with some few exceptions, the territory of all the states was subjected, as formerly, to the payment of a tithe on corn, wine, oil, and the fruitus minutae. 1. It was further determined that place and time of paying these tithes to the decumani should be and continue as settled by the law of King Hero Lex Hieronica, which enacted severe penalties against any orator who did not pay his due, as well as against the decumani who exacted more than their tenth. The name of decumani was also applied to the farmers of these tribunes, who purchased them from the state, and then collected them on their own account. In fact, the revenues which Rome derived from conquered countries, consisting chiefly of tolls, tithes, harbor duties, and sea, were chiefly let out, or, as the Romans expressed it, sold by the censors in Rome itself to the highest bidders. C. Very E. 7. The tithes raised in the province of Sicily alone, with the exception of those of wine, oil, and garden produce, were not sold at Rome, but in the district of Sicily itself, according to a practice established by Hero C. Very E. 64:33. The persons who undertook the farming of the public revenue, of course, belonged to the wealthiest Romans and down to the end of the Republic, as well as during the earlier part of the Empire. The farming of the public revenues was almost exclusively in the hands of the equites, whence the words equites and publicani are sometimes used as synonymous. C. There. I. 51, 52, 71. The publicani had to give security to the state for the sum at which they bought one or more branches of revenue in a province. And as no one person was rich enough to give sufficient security, a number of equites generally united together and formed a company societas, or corpus which was recognized by the state, and by which they were enabled to carry on their undertakings on a large scale. The shares which each partner in such a company took in the business were called parts, and if they were small particularly, the responsible person in each company, and the one who contracted with the state, was called manceps, but there was also a magistrate to manage the business of each company, who resided at Rome, and kept up an extensive correspondence with the agents in the provinces. C. Very E. 74. He seems to have held his office only for 1 year. His representative in the province was called submagister, who had to travel about and superintend the actual business of collecting the revenues. Nobody but a Roman citizen was allowed to become a member of a company of publicani. Freemen and slaves were excluded. C. Very E. 39. No Roman magistrate, however, or governor of a province, was allowed to take any share whatever in the company of publicani. C. Very E. 57. A regulation which was chiefly intended as a protection against the oppression of the provincials. The actual levying or collecting of the taxes in the provinces was performed by an inferior class of men, who were sed operas publicanus dare, or s in operas societatis. C. Very E. 41. They were engaged by the publicani, and consisted of freemen as well as slaves, Romans as well as provincials. C. Very E. 77 myth, dict. And pages 316, 806, VV. Decani, publicani. Bearers had broken the law which forbade a governor of a province to hold shares in a company which found no revenue. And as he had therefore a personal interest in increasing the taxes, he committed unexampled acts of extortion himself, and protected those who committed similar act. And in many other respects he had plundered the cultivators of the public domain, whom I have called in this translation agriculturists, not using the word farmers, by which word I have rendered publicani. The medinus, as we see, ch. 45, 46, was equal to 6 modi, and contained within a fraction of 12 English gallons, or a bushel and a half. One every man, O judges, who, without being prompted by any enmity, or stung by any private injury, or tempted by any reward, prosecutes another for the good of the republic, ought to consider, not only how great a burden he is liking upon himself at the time, but also how much trouble he is courting for the remainder of his life. For he imposes on himself the law of innocence, of moderation, and of all virtues, who demands from another an account of his life. And he does so the more if, as I said before, he does this being urged by no other motive except a desire for the common good. Superscript 2. For if anyone assumes to himself to correct the manners of others, and to reprove their faults, who will pardon him, if he himself turn aside in any particular from the strict line of duty? Wherefore, a citizen of this sort is the more to be praised and beloved by all men for this reason also, that he does not only remove a worthless citizen from the republic, but he also promises and binds himself to be such a man as to be compelled, not only by an ordinary inclination to virtue and duty, but by even some more unavoidable principle, to live virtuously and honorably. Superscript 3. And, therefore, O judges, that most illustrious and most eloquent man, Lucius Crassus, was often heard to say that he did not repent of anything so much as having ever proceeded against Caius Carbo, for by so doing he had his inclination as to everything less uncontrolled, and he thought, too, that his way of life was remarked by more people than he liked. And he, fortified as he was by the protection of his own genius and fortune, was yet hampered by this anxiety which he had brought upon himself, before his judgment was fully formed, at his entrance into life. On which account virtue and integrity is less looked for from those who undertake this business as young men, than from those who do so at a riper age. for they, for the sake of credit and ostentation, become accusers of others before they have had time to take notice how much more free the life of those who have accused no one is. We who have already shown both what we could do, and what judgment we had, unless we could easily restrain our desires, should never, of our own accord, deprive ourselves of all liberty and freedom in our way of life. 2:4 And I have a greater burden on me than those who have accused other men, if that deserve to be called the burden which you bear with pleasure and delight, but still I have in one respect undertaken a greater burden than others who have done the same thing, because all men are required to abstain most especially from those vices for which they have reproved another. Have you accused any thief or rapacious man? You must forever avoid all suspicion of avarice. Have you prosecuted any spiteful or cruel man? You must forever take care not to appear in any matter the least harsh or severe. A seducer? An adulterer? You must take care most diligently that no trace of licentiousness be ever seen in your conduct. In short, everything which you have impeached in another must be earnestly avoided by you yourself. In truth, not only no accuser, but no reprover even can be endured, who is himself detected in the vice which he reproves in another. 5 I, in the case of one man, am finding fault with every vice which can exist in a wicked and abandoned man. I say that there is no indication of lust, of wickedness, of audacity, which you cannot see clearly in the life of that one man. In the case of this criminal, I, O judges, establish this law against myself. That I must so live as to appear to be, and always to have been, utterly unlike that man, not only in all my actions and words, but even in that arrogance and haughtiness of countenance and eyes which you see before you. I will bear without uneasiness, O judges, that course of life which was previously agreeable to me of my own accord, shall now, by the law and conditions I here laid down for myself, become necessary for me. 3:6 And in the case of this man you often, O Hortensius, are asking me, under the pressure of what enmity or what injury I have come forward to accuse him. I omit all mention of my duty, and of my connection with the Sicilians. I answer you as to the point of enmity. Do you think there is any greater enmity than that arising from the opposite opinions of men, and the contrariety of their wishes and inclinations? Can he who thinks good faith the holiest thing in life avoid being an enemy to that man who, as quaestor, dared to despoil, to desert, to betray, and to attack his consul, whose counsels he had shared, whose money he had received, with all whose business affairs he had been entrusted? Can he who reverences modesty and chastity behold with equanimity the daily adulteries, the dissolute manners of that man, the domestic pandering to his passions? Can he who wishes to pay due honors to the immortal gods, by any means avoid being an enemy to that man who has plundered all the temples, who has dared to commit his robberies even on the track of the wills of the sacred car? 2. Must not he who thinks that all men ought to live under equal laws, be very hostile to you, when he considers the variety and caprice of your decrees? Must not he who grieves at the injuries of the allies and the distresses of the provinces be excited against you by the plundering of Asia, the harassing of Pamphylia, the miserable state and the agony of Sicily? Ought not he who desires the right and the liberty of the Roman citizens to be held sacred among all men, be even more than an enemy to you, when he neglects your scourgings, your executions, your crosses erected for the punishment of Roman citizens? 7 Or if he had in any particular made a decree contrary to my interest unjustly, would you then think that I was fairly an enemy to him? But now that he has acted contrary to the interests, and property, and advantage, and inclination, and welfare of all good men, do you ask why I am an enemy to a man towards whom the whole Roman people is hostile? I, who above all other men ought to undertake, to gratify the desires of the Roman people, even a greater burden and duty than my strength perhaps is equal to. For what? Cannot even those matters, which seem more trifling, move anyone's mind, at the worthlessness and audacity of that man should have a more easy access to your own friendship, O Hortensius, and to that of other great and noble men, than the virtue and integrity of any one of us? You hate the industry of new men. You despise their economy. You scorn their modesty. You wish their talents and virtues to be depressed and extinguished. 8 You are fond of errors, I suppose so. If you are not gratified with his virtue, and his innocence, and his industry, and his modesty, and his chastity, at least you are transported at his conversation, his accomplishments, and his high breeding. He has no such gifts. But, on the contrary, all his qualities are stained with the most extreme disgrace and infamy, with most extraordinary stupidity and borishness. If any man's house is open to this man, do you think it is open, or rather that it is yawning and begging something? He is a favorite of your factors, of your valets. Your freedmen, your slaves, your housemaids, are in love with him. He, when he calls, is introduced out of his turn. He alone is admitted, while others, often most virtuous men, are excluded. From which it is very easily understood that those people are the most dear to you who have lived in such a manner that without your protection they cannot be safe. 9 What? Do you think this can be endurable to anyone, that we should live on slender incomes in such a way as not even to wish to acquire anything more? That we should be content with maintaining our dignity, and the goodwill of the Roman people, not by wealth, but by virtue? But that man having robbed everyone on all sides, and having escaped with impunity, should live, in prosperity and abundance? That all your banquets should be decorated with his plate, your forum and hall of assembly with his statues and pictures? Especially when, through your own valour, you are rich in all such trophies? That it should be Verus who adorns your villas with his spoils? That it should be Verus who is vying with Lucius Mummius, so that the one appears to have laid waste more cities of the allies, than the other overthrew belonging to the enemy? That the one, unassisted, seems to have adorned more villas with the decorations of temples, than the other decorated temples with the spoils of the enemy? And shall he be dearer to you, in order that others may more willingly become subservient to your covetousness at their own risk? 5:10 But these topics shall be mentioned at another time, and they have already been mentioned elsewhere. Let us proceed to the other matters, after we have in a few words, O judges, begged your favorable construction. All through our former speech we had your attention very carefully given to us. It was very pleasing to us. But it will be far more pleasing, if you will be so kind as to attend to what follows. Because in all the things which were said before, there was some pleasure arising from the very variety and novelty of the subjects and of the charges. Now we are going to discuss the affair of Corinth. which indeed in the greatness of the iniquity exceeds nearly all the other charges, but will have far less variety and agreeableness in the discussion. But it is quite worthy of your authority and wisdom, O judges, in the matter of careful hearing, to give no less weight to conscientiousness in the discharge of your duties, than to pleasure. 11. Inquiring into this charge respecting the corn, keep this in view, O judges, that you are going to inquire into the estates and fortunes of all the Sicilians and to the property of all the Roman citizens who cultivate land in Sicily and to the revenues handed down to you by your ancestors and to the life and sustenance of the Roman people. And if these matters appear to you important as, and most important, O not be weary if they are pressed upon you from various points of view, and at some length. It cannot escape the notice of any one of you, O judges, that all the advantage and desirableness of Sicily, which is in any way connected with the convenience of the Roman people, consists mainly in its corn. For in other respects we are indeed assisted by the province, but as to this article, we are fed and supported by it. 12. The case, O judges, will be divided under 3 heads in my accusation, for, first, I shall speak of the collectors of the tenths. Secondly, of the corn which has been bought. Thirdly, of that which has been valued. 6. There is, O judges, this difference between Sicily and other provinces, in the matter of tribute derived from the lands. That in the other provinces, either the tribute imposed is of a fixed amount, which is called stipendiarium, as in the case of the Spaniards and most of the Carthaginian provinces, being a sort of reward of victory, and penalty for war. Or else a contract exists between the state and the farmers, settled by the censor, as is the case in Asia, by the Sempronian law. But the cities in Sicily were received into our friendship and alliance, retaining the same laws which they had before, and that being subject to the Roman people on the same conditions as they had formerly been subject to their own princes. 13. Very few cities of Sicily were subdued in war by our ancestors, and even in the case of those which were, though their land was made the public domain of the Roman people, still it was afterwards restored to them. That domain is regularly let out to farmers by the censors. There are 2 federate cities, whose tents are not put up to auction. The city of the Mamertines and Tauromenium. Besides these, there are 5 cities without any treaty, free and enfranchised. Cenchreae, Halesa, Sebsta, Halicia, and Panormus. All the land of the other states of Sicily is subject to the payment of tenths. And was so, before the sovereignty of the Roman people, by the will and laws of the Sicilians themselves. 14. See now the wisdom of our ancestors, who, when they had added Sicily, so valuable an assistant both in war and peace, to the Republic, were so careful to defend the Sicilians and to retain them in their allegiance, that they not only imposed no new tax upon their lands, but did not even alter the law of putting up for sale the contracts of the farmers of the tenths, or the time or place of selling them. So that they were to put them up for sale at the regular time of year, at the same place, in Sicily, and short, in every respect as the law of Hero directed. They permitted them still to manage their own affairs, and were not willing that their minds should be disturbed even by a new mean to a law, much less by an actual new law. 15. And so that resolved that the farming of the tenth should always be put up to auction according to the law of Hero, in order that the discharge of that office might be the more agreeable if, though the supreme power was changed, still, not only the laws of the king who was very dear to the Sicilians, but his name also remained in force among them. This law the Sicilians always used before Verres was praetor. He first dared to root up and alter the established usages of them all, their customs which had been handed down to them from their ancestors, the conditions of their friendship with us, and the rights secured to them by our alliance. 7:16 And in this is the first thing I object to and accuse you for, that in a custom of such long standing, and so thoroughly established, you made any innovation at all. Have you ever gained anything by this genius of yours? Were you superior in prudence and wisdom to so many wise and illustrious men who governed that province before you? That is your renown. This praise is due to your genius and diligence. I admit and grant this to you. I do know that, at Rome, when you were praetor, you did transfer by your edict the possession of inheritance from the children to strangers, from the first heirs to the second, from the laws to your own licentious covetousness. I do know that you corrected the edicts of all your predecessors, and gave possession of inheritance not according to the evidence of those who produced the will, but according to theirs who said that a will had been made. And I do know too that those new practices, first brought forward and invented by you, were a very great profit to you. I recollect, moreover, that you also abrogated and altered the laws of the censors about the keeping the public buildings in repair, so that he might not take the contract to whom the care of the building belonged, so that his guardians and relations might not consult the advantage of their award so as to prevent his being stripped of all his property. That you appointed a very limited time for the work, in order to exclude others from the business. But that with respect to the contractor you favored, you did not observe any fixed time at all. 17 So that I do not marvel at your having established a new law in the matter of the tenths you, a man so wise, so thoroughly practiced in praetorian edicts and censorian laws. I do not wonder, I say, at your having invented something. But I do blame you, I do impeach you, for having of your own accord, without any command from the people, without the authority of the Senate, changed the laws of the province of Sicily. 18 The Senate permitted Lucius Octavius and Caius Cotta, the consuls, to put up to auction at Rome the tenths of wine, and oil, and of pulse, which before your time the quaestors had been in the habit of putting up in Sicily, and to establish any law with respect to those articles which they might think fit. When the contract was offered for sale, the farmers begged them to add some clauses to the law, and yet not to depart from the other laws of the censors. A man opposed this, who by accident was at Rome at that time. Your host, our host, and intimate friend, I say, O Verres, Phineas, of Thermi, who was here present, the consuls examined into the matter, when they had summoned many of the principal and most honorable men of the state to form a council on the subject. According to the opinion of that council they gave notice that they should put the tenths up to auction according to the law of Hero. 8:19 Was it not so, men of the greatest wisdom, invested with the supreme authority, to whom the Senate had given the whole power of making laws respecting the letting out the farming of the tributes, and this power had been ratified by the people, while only one Sicilian objected to it, would not alter the name of the law of Hero, even when the measure would have been accompanied by an augmentation of the revenue. But you, a man of no wisdom, of no authority, without any order from people or senate, while all Sicily objected, abrogated the whole law of Hero, to the greatest injury and even destruction of the revenue. 20. But what law is this, O judges, which he amends, or rather totally abrogates? A law framed with the greatest acuteness and the greatest diligence, which gives up the cultivator of the land to the collector of the tenths, guarded by so many securities, that neither in the cornfields, nor on the threshing floors, nor in the barns, nor while removing his corn privately, nor while carrying it away openly, can the cultivator defraud the collector of one single grain without the severest punishment. The law has been framed with such care, that it is plain that a man framed it who had no other revenues. With such acuteness that it was plain that he was a Sicilian. With such severity, that he was evidently a tyrant. By this law, however, cultivating the land was an advantageous trade for the Sicilian. For the laws for the collectors of the tenths were also drawn up so carefully that it is not possible for more than the tenth to be extorted from the cultivator against his will. 21. And though all these things were settled in this way, after so many years and even ages, Verres was found not only to change, but entirely to overturn them, and to convert to purposes of his own most infamous profit those regulations which had long ago been instituted and established for the safety of the allies and the benefit of the republic. In the first instance he appointed certain men, collectors of the tenths in name, in reality the ministers and satellites of his desires. By whom I will show that the province was for 3 years so harassed and plundered, O judges, that it will take many years and a long series of wise and incorruptible governors to recover it. 922. The chief of all those who were called collectors, was Quintus Apronius, that man whom you see in court, concerning whose extraordinary wickedness you have heard the complaints of most influential deputations. Look, O judges, at the face and countenance of the man. And from that obstinacy which he retains now in the most desperate circumstances, you may imagine and recollect what his arrogance must have been in Sicily. This Apronius is the man whom Verres, though he had collected together the most infamous men from all quarters, and though he had taken with him no small number of men like himself in worthlessness, licentiousness, and audacity, still considered most like himself of any man in the whole province. And so in a very short time they became intimate, not because of interest, nor of reason, nor of any introduction from mutual friends, but from the baseness and similarity of their pursuits. 23. You know the depraved and licentious habits of Verres. Imagine to yourselves, if you can, anyone who can be in every respect equal to him in the wicked and dissolute commission of every crime that man will be Apronius. Who, as he shows not only by his life, but by his person and countenance, is a vast gulf and whirlpool of every sort of vice and infamy. Whom did Verres employ as his chief agent in all his adulteries, in all his plundering of temples, in all his devout banquets? And the similarity of their manners caused such a friendship and unanimity between them, that Apronius, whom every one else thought a boor and a barbarian, appeared to him alone an agreeable and an accomplished man. That, though every one else hated him, and could not bear the sight of him, Verres could not bear to be away from him. That, though others shunned even the banquets at which Apronius is to be present, Verres used the same cup with him. Lastly, that, though the odor of Apronius's breath and person is such that even, as one may say, the beasts cannot endure him, he appeared to Verres alone sweet and pleasant. He sat next to him on the judgment seat. He was alone with him in his chamber. He was at the head of his table at his banquets. And especially then, when he began to dance at the feast naked, while the young son of the praetor was sitting by. 1024. This man, as I began to say, Verres selected for his principal agent in distressing and plundering the fortunes of the cultivators of the land. To this man's audacity, and wickedness, and cruelty, our most faithful allies and most virtuous citizens were given up, O judges, by this praetor, and were placed at his mercy by new regulations and new edicts, the entire law of Hero, as I said before, having been rejected and repudiated. 25. First of all, listen, O judges, to his splendid edict. Whatever amount of tithe the collector declared that the cultivator ought to pay, that amount the cultivator should be compelled to pay to the collector. Oh? Let him pay as much as Apronius demands? What is this? Is the regulation of a praetor for allies, or the edict and command of an insane tyrant to conquered enemies? Am I to give as much as he demands? He will demand every grain that I can get out of my land. Am I to give all? Yes, and more too, if he chooses. What, then, am I to do? What do you think? You must either pay, or you will be convicted of having disobeyed the edict. O ye immortal gods, what a state of things is this, for it is hardly credible. And indeed. 26. I am persuaded, O judges, that, though you should think that all other vices are met in this man, still this must seem false to you. For I myself, though all Sicily told me of it, still should not dare to affirm this to you, if I was not able to recite to you these edicts from his own documents in those very words as I will do. Give this, I pray you, to the clerk. He shall read from the register. Read the edict about the returns of property. The edict about the returns of property is read. He says I am not reading the whole. For that is what he seems to intimate by shaking his head. What am I passing over? Is it that part where you take care of the interests of the Sicilians, and show regard for the miserable cultivators? For you announce in your edict, that you will condemn the collector in eightfold damages, if he has taken more than was due to him. I do not wish anything to be passed over. Read this also which he requires. Read every word. The edict about the eightfold damages is read. Does this mean that the cultivator is to prosecute the collector at law? It is a miserable and unjust thing for men to be brought from the country into the forum, from the prod to the courts of justice, from habits of rustic life to actions and trials to which they are wholly unaccustomed. 1127. When in all the other countries liable to tribute, of Asia, of Macedonia, of Spain, of Gaul, of Africa, of Sicily, and in those parts of Italy also which are so liable. When in all these, I say, the farmer in every case has a right to claim and a power to distrain, but not to seize and take possession without the interference of the law, you established regulations respecting the most virtuous and honest and honorable class of men, that is, respecting the cultivators of the soil, which are contrary to all other laws. Which is the most just, for the collector to have to make his claim, or for the cultivator to have to recover what has been unlawfully seized? for them to go to trial when things are in their original state, or when one side is ruined. For him to be in possession of the property who has acquired it by hard labor, or him who has obtained it by bidding for it at an auction? What more? They who cultivate single acres, who never cease from personal labor, of which class there were a great number, and a vast multitude among the Sicilians before you came as praetor, what are they to do? When they have given to Apronius all he has demanded, are they to leave their allotments? To leave their own household gods? To come to Syracuse, in order while you, forsooth, are a praetor, to prosecute, by the equal law which they will find there, Apronius, the delight and joy of your life, in a suit for recovery of their property? 28 But so be it. Some fearless and experienced cultivator will be found, who, when he has paid the collector as much as he says is due, will seek to recover it by course of law, and will sue for the eightfold penalty. I look for the vigor of the edict, for the impartiality of the praetor. I espouse the cause of the cultivator. I wish to see Apronius condemned in the eightfold penalty. What now does the cultivator demand? Nothing but sentence for an eightfold penalty, according to the edict. What says Apronius? He is unable to object. What says the praetor? He bids him challenge the judges. Let us, says he, make out the decrees. What decrees? Those from my retinue. You will challenge the others. What? Of what men is the retinue composed? Of Volusius the soothsayer, and Cornelius the physician, and the other dogs whom you see licking up the crumbs about my judgment seat. For he never appointed any judge or reaped the praetor 3, from the proper body. 4, he said all men who possessed one clod of earth were unfairly prejudiced against the collectors. People had to sue Apronius before these men who had not yet got rid of the surfeit from his last banquet. 12 What a splendid and memorable court. What an impartial decision. What a safe resource for the cultivators of the soil. 29 And that you may understand what sort of decisions are obtained in actions for the eightfold penalty, and what sort of judges those selected from that man's retinue are considered to be, listen to this. Do you think that any collector, when this license was allowed him of taking from the cultivator whatever he claimed, ever did demand more than was due? Consider yourselves in your own minds, whether you think anyone ever did so, especially when it might have happened, not solely through covetousness, but even though ignorance, many must have done so. But I say that all extorted more, and a great deal more, than the proper tense. Tell me of one man, in the whole 3 years of your praetorship, who was condemned in the eightfold penalty. Condemned, indeed. Tell me of one man who was ever prosecuted according to your edict. There was not, in fact, one cultivator who was able to complain that injustice had been done to him. Not one collector who claimed 1 grain more as due to him than really was due. Far from that. Apronius seized and carried off whatever he chose from everyone. In every district the cultivators, harassed and plundered as they were complaining, and yet no instance of a trial can be found. 30 Why is this? Why did so many bold, honorable, and highly esteemed men, many Sicilians, so many Roman knights and injured by one most worthless and infamous man, not seek to recover the eightfold penalty, which had most unquestionably been incurred? What is the cause? What is the reason? That reason alone, O judges, which you see, equals they knew they should come off at the trial defrauded and ridiculed. In truth, what sort of triad must that be, when 3 of the profligate and abandoned retinue of bearers set on the tribunal under the name of judges? Slaves of bearers, not inherited by him from his father, but recommended to him by his mistress. 31 The cultivator, forsooth, might plead his cause. He might show that no corn was left him by Apronius, had even his other property was seized. That he himself had been driven away with blows. Those admirable men would lay their heads together, they would chat to one another about rebels and harlots, if they could catch anyone leaving the praetor. The cause would seem to be properly heard, Apronius would have risen, full of his new dignity as a knight. Not like a collector all over dirt and dust, but reeking with perfumes, languid with the lateness of the last night's drinking party, with his first motion, and with his breath he would have filled the whole place with the odor of wine, of perfume, and of his person. He would have said, what he repeatedly has said, that he had bought, not the tents, but the property and fortunes of the cultivators. That he, Apronius, was not a collector, but a second Verus, he absolute lord and master of those men. And when he had said this, those admirable men of Verus' train, the judges, would deliberate, not about acquitting Apronius, but they would inquire how they could condemn the cultivator himself to pay damages to Apronius. 1332 When you had granted this license for plundering the cultivators to the collectors of the tents, that is, to Apronius, why allowing him to demand as much as he chose, and to carry off as much as he demanded, were you preparing this defense for your trial, had you had promised by edict that you would assign judges in a trial for an eightfold penalty? Even if in truth you were to give power to the cultivator, not only to challenge his judges, but even to pick them out of the whole body of the Syracusan assembly, a body of most eminent and honorable men, still no one could bear this new sort of injustice, that, when one has given up the whole of one's produce to the farmer, and had one's property taken out of one's hands, then one is to endeavor to recover one's property and to seek its restitution by legal proceedings. 33 But when what is granted by the edict is, in name indeed, a trial, but in reality a collusion of your attendants, most worthless men, with the collectors, who are your partners, and besides that, with the judges, do you still dare to mention that trial, especially when what you say is refuted, not merely by my speech, but by the facts themselves? When in all the distresses of the cultivators of the soil, and all the injustice of the collectors, not only has no trial ever taken place according to that splendid edict, but none has ever been so much as demanded. 34 However, he will be more favorable to the cultivators than he appears. For the same man who has announced in his edict that he will allow a trial against the collectors, in which they shall be liable to an eightfold penalty, had it also set down in his edict, that he would grant a similar trial against the cultivators, in which they should be liable to a fourfold penalty. Who now dares to say that this man was unfavorably disposed or hostile to the cultivators? How much more lenient is he to them than to the collectors? He has ordered in his edict that the Sicilian magistrate should exact from the cultivator whatever the collector declared ought to be paid to him. What sentence has he left behind, which can be pronounced against a cultivator of the soil? It is not a bad thing, says he, for that fear to exist. So that, when the money has been exacted from the cultivator, still there will be behind the fear of the court of justice, to prevent him from stirring himself. If you wish to exact money from me by process of law, remove the Sicilian magistrate. If you employ this violence, what need is there of a process of law? Moreover, who will there be who would not prefer paying to your collectors what they demand, to being condemned in 4 times the amount by your attendants? 1435. But that is a splendid clause in the edict, that gives notice that in all disputes which arise between the cultivator and the collector, he will assign judges, if either party wishes it. In the first place, what dispute can there be when he who ought to make a claim, makes a seizure instead? And when he seizes, not as much as is due, but as much as he chooses? And when he, whose property is seized, cannot possibly recover his own by a suit at law? In the second place, this doughty fellow wants even in this to seem cunning and wily. For he frames his edict in these words: if either wishes it, I will assign judges. How neatly does he think he is robbing him? He gives each party the power of choice. But it makes no difference whether he wrote if either wishes it, or if the collector wishes it. For the cultivator will never wish for those judges of yours. 36. What next? What sort of edicts are those which he issued to meet particular occasions, at the suggestion of Apronius? When Quintus Cetidius, a most honorable man, and a Roman knight, resisted Apronius, and declared that he would not pay more than a tenth, a sudden special edict makes its appearance, that no one is to remove his corn from the threshing floor before he has settled the demands of the collector. Cetidius put up with this injustice also, and allowed his corn to be damaged by the rain, while remaining on the threshing floor, when on the sudden that most fruitful and profitable edict comes out, that every one was to have his tents delivered at the waterside before the 1st of August. 37. By this edict, it was not the Sicilians, for he had already sufficiently crushed and ruined them by his previous edicts, but all those Roman knights who had fancied that they could preserve their rights against Apronius, excellent men, and highly esteemed by other praetors, who were delivered bound hand and foot into the power of Apronius. For just listen and see what sort of edicts these are. A man, says he, is not to remove his corn from the threshing floor, unless he has settled all demands. This is a sufficiently strong inducement to making unfair demands. For I had rather give too much, than not remove my corn from the threshing floor at the proper time. But that violence does not affect Cetidius, and some others like Cetidius, who say, I will rather not remove my corn, than submit to an extortionate demand. To these then the second edict is opposed. You must have delivered it by the 1st of August. I will deliver it then. Unless you have settled the demands, you shall not remove it. So the fixing of the day for delivering it at the waterside, compelled the man to remove his corn from the threshing floor. And the prohibition to remove, unless the demand were settled, made the settlement compulsory and not voluntary. 1538. But what follows is not only contrary to the law of Hero, not only contrary to the customs of all former praetors, but even contrary to all the rights of the Sicilians, which they have as granted them by the Senate and people of Rome, that they shall not be forced to give security to appear in any courts of justice but their own. There was made a regulation that the cultivator should appear to an action brought by a collector in any court which the collector might choose. So that in this way also gain might accrue to Apronius, when he dragged a defendant all the way from Leontini to Lilybaeum to appear before the court there, by making false accusations against the wretched cultivators. Although that device for false accusation was also contrived with singular cunning, when he ordered that the cultivators should make a return of their acres, as to what they were sown with. And this had not only great power in causing most iniquitous claims to be submitted to, as we shall show hereafter, and that too without any advantage to the Republic, but at the same time it gave a great handle to false accusations, which all men were liable to if Apronius chose. 39. For, as anyone said anything contrary to his inclination, immediately he was summoned before the court on some charge relative to the returns made of his lands. Through fear of which action a great quantity of corn was extorted from many, and vast sums were collected. Not that it was really difficult to mail a correct return of a man's acres, or even to make an extravagantly liberal one, for what danger could there be in doing that? But still it opened a pretext for demanding a trial because the cultivator had not made his return in the terms of the edict. And you must feel sure what sort of trial that would be while that man was praetor, if you recollect what sort of a train and retinue he had about him. What is it, then, which I wish you to understand, O judges, from the iniquity of these new edicts? That any injury has been done to our allies? That you see? That the authority of his predecessors has been overruled by him? He will not dare to deny it. 1640. That Apronius had such great influence while he was praetor, that he must unavoidably confess. But perhaps you will inquire in this place, as the law reminds you to do, whether he himself has made any money by this conduct. I will show you that he has made vast sums, and I will prove that he established all those iniquitous rules which I have mentioned before, with no object but his own profit, when I have first removed out of his line of defense that rampart which he thinks he shall be able to employ against all my attacks. I sold, says he, the tents at a high price. What are you saying? Did you, O most audacious and senseless of men, sell the tents? Did you sell those portions which the Senate and people of Rome allowed you to sell, or the whole produce? And in that the whole property and fortunes of the cultivators? If the crier had openly given notice by your order, that there was being sold, not a tenth, but half the corn, and if purchasers had come with the idea of buying half the corn, then you had sold the half for more than the other praetors had sold the tenth part of it, would that seem strange to anyone? But what shall we say if the crier gave notice of the sale of the tents, but if, in fact, by your regulation, why your edict, why the terms of the sale which you offered, more than a half portion was sold? Will you still think that creditable to yourself, to have sold what you had no right to sell for more than others sold what they fairly could? 41. You sold the tents for more than others had sold them. By what means did you manage that? By innocent means? Look at the temple of Castor, and then, if you dare, talk of your innocent means. By your diligence? Look at the erasures in your registers at the name of Sthenius of Thermi, and then have the face to call yourself diligent. By your ability? You who refused at the former pleadings to put questions to the witnesses, and preferred presenting yourself dumb before them, pray call yourself and your advocates able men as much as you please. By what means, then, did you manage what you say you did? For it is a great credit to you if you have surpassed your predecessors in ability, and left to your successors your example and your authority. Perhaps you had no one before you fit to imitate. But, no doubt, all men will imitate you, the investor and first parent of such excellent methods. 42. What cultivator of the soil, when you were praetor, paid a tenth? Who paid 2/10 only? Who was there who did not think himself treated with the greatest lenity if he paid 3/10 instead of 1, except a few men, who, on account of a partnership with you in your robberies, paid nothing at all? See how great a difference there is between your harshness and the kindness of the Senate. The Senate, when owing to any necessity of the Republic it is compelled to decree that a second tenth shall be exacted, decrees that for that second tenth money be paid to the cultivators, so that the quantity which is taken beyond what is strictly due may be considered to be purchased, not to be taken away. You, when you were exacting and seizing so many tenths, not by a decree of the Senate, but by your own edicts and nefarious regulations, shall you think that you have done a great deed if you sell them for more than Lucius Hortensius, the father of this Quintus Hortensius, did, Honcnaus Pompus or Caius Marcellus sold them for? Men who did not violate justice, or law, or established rules? 43. Were you to consider what might be got in 1 year, or in 2 years, and to neglect the safety of the province, the well-doing of the corn interest, and the interests of the Republic in future times, though you came to the administration of affairs when matters were so managed that sufficient corn was supplied to the Roman people from Sicily, and still it was a profitable thing for the cultivators to plow and till their land? What have you brought about? What have you gained? In order that, while you were praetor, some addition might be made to the revenue derived from the tenths, you have caused the allotments of land to be deserted and abandoned. Lucius Metellus succeeded you. Were you more innocent than Metellus? Were you more desirous of credit and honor? For you were seeking the consulship, but Metellus neglected the renown which he had inherited from his father and his grandfather. He sold the tenths for much less, not only than you had done, but even than those who had sold them before you. 17. I ask, if he himself could not contrive any means for selling them at the best possible price, could he not follow in the fresh steps of you the very last praetor, so as to use your admirable edicts and regulations, invented and devised by you their author? 44. But he thought that he should not at all be a Metellus if he imitated you in anything. He who, when he thought that he was to go to that province, sent letters to the cities of Sicily from Rome, a thing which no one in the memory of man ever did before, in which he exhorts and entreats the Sicilians to plow and sow their land for the service of the Roman people. He begs this some time before his arrival, and at the same time declares that he will sell the tenths according to the law of Hero. That is to say, that in the whole business of the tenths he will do nothing like that man. And he writes this, not from being impelled by any covetousness to send matters into the province before his time, but out of prudence, lest, if the seed time passed, we should have not a single grain of corn in the province of Sicily. See Metellus' letters. 45. Read the letter of Lucius Metellus. The letters of Lucius Metellus are read. 18. It is these letters, O judges, of Lucius Metellus, which you have heard, that have raised all the corn that therein this year in Sicily. No one would have broken one clod of earth in all the land of Sicily subject to the payment of tenths, if Metellus had not sent this letter. What? Did this idea occur to Metellus by inspiration, or had he his information from the Sicilians who had come to Rome in great numbers, and from the traders of Sicily? And who is ignorant what great crowds of them assembled at the door of the Marcelli, the most ancient patrons of Sicily? What crowds of them thronged to Cnaus Pompus, the consul elect, and to the rest of the men connected with the province? And such a thing never yet took place in the instance of any one, as for a man to be openly accused by those people over whose property and families he had supreme dominion and power. So great was the effect of his injuries, that men preferred to suffer anything, rather than not to bewail themselves and complain of his wickedness and injuries. 46. And when Metellus had sent these letters couched in almost a supplicating tone to all the cities, still he was far from prevailing with them to sow the land as they formerly had. For many had fled, as I shall presently show, and had left not only their allotments of land, but even their paternal homes, being driven away by the injuries of that man. I will not indeed, O judges, say anything for the sake of unduly exaggerating my charges. But the sentiments which I have imbibed through my eyes and in my mind, those I will state to you truly, and, as far as I can, plainly. 47. For when 4 years afterwards I came into Sicily, it appeared to me in such a condition as those countries are apt to be in which a bitter and long war has been carried on. Those plains and fields which I had formerly seen beautiful and verdant, I now saw so laid waste and desolate that the very land itself seemed to feel the want of its cultivators, and to be mourning for its master. The land of Urbita, of Enna, of Morgantia, of Assoria, of Imicara, and of Agerium, was so deserted as to its principal part, that we had to look not only for the allotments of land, but also for the body of owners. But the district of Etna, which used to be most highly cultivated, and that which was the very head of the corn country, the district of Leontini, the character of which was formerly such that when you had once seen that sown, you did not fear any dearness of provisions, was so rough and unsightly, that in the most fruitful part of Sicily we were asking where Sicily could be gone. The previous year had, indeed, greatly shaken the cultivators, but the last one had utterly ruined them. 1948. Will you dare also to make mention to me of the tenths? Do you, after such wickedness, after such cruelty, after such numerous and serious injuries done to people, when the whole province of Sicily entirely depends on its arable land, and on its rights connected with that land, after the cultivators have been entirely ruined, the fields deserted FTE, or you have left no one in so wealthy and populous a province, not only no property, but no hope even remaining. Do you, I say, think that you can acquire any popularity by saying that you have sold the tenths at a better price than the other praetors? As if the Roman people had formed this wish, or the Senate had given you this commission, by seizing all the fortunes of the cultivators under the name of tenths, to deprive the Roman people for all future time of that revenue, and of their supply of corn. And, as if after that, by adding some part of your own plunder to the total amount got from the tenths, you could appear to have deserved well of the Roman people. And I say this, as if his injustice was to be reproved in this particular, that, out of a desire for credit to be got by surpassing others in the sum derived from tens, he had put forth a law rather too severe, and edicts rather too stringent, and rejected the examples of all his predecessors. 49. You sold the tenths at a high price. What will be said, if I prove that you appropriated and took to your own house no less a sum than you had sent to Rome under the name of tenths? What is there to obtain popularity for you in that plan of yours, when you took for yourself from the province of the Roman people a share equal to that which you sent to the Roman people? What will be said if I prove that you took twice as much corn yourself as you sent to the Roman people? Shall we still expect to see your advocate toss his head at this accusation, and throw himself on the people, and on the assembly here present? These things you have heard before, O judges. But perhaps you have heard it on no other authority than report, and the common conversation of men. Know now that an enormous sum was taken by him on pretenses connected with corn. And consider at the same time the profligacy of that saying of his, when he said that by the profit made on the tenths alone, he could buy himself off from all his dangers. 2050. We have heard this for a long time, O judges. I say that there is not one of you who has not often heard that the collectors of the tenths were that man's partners. I do not think that anything else has been said against him falsely by those who think ill of him but this. For they are to be considered partners of a man, with whom the gains of a business are shared. But I say that the whole of these gains, and the whole of the fortunes of the cultivators, went to Verres alone. I say that Apronius, and those slaves of Venus, who were quite a new class of farmers first heard of in his praetorship, and the other collectors, were only agents of that one man's gains, and ministers of his plunder. How do you prove that? 51. How did I prove that he had committed robbery in the contract for those pillars? Chiefly, I think, by this fact, that he had put forth an unjust and unprecedented law. For whoever attempted to change all the rights of people, and the customs of all men, getting great blame for so doing, except for some gain. I will proceed and carry this matter further. You sold the tenths according to an unjust law, in order to sell them for more money. Why, when the tenths were now knocked down and sold, and nothing could now be added to their sum total, but much might be to your own gains, I did new edicts appear, made on the sudden and to meet an emergency. For I say, that in your third year you issued edicts, that a collector might summon a man before the court anywhere he liked. That the cultivator might not remove his corn from the threshing floor, before he had settled the claims of the collector. That they should have the tenths delivered at the waterside before the 1st of August. All these edicts, I say, you issued after the tenths had been sold. But if you had issued them for the sake of the Republic, notice would have been given of them at the time of selling. Because you were acting with a view to your own interest, you, being prompted by your love of gain and by the emergency, repaired the omission which had unintentionally occurred. 52. But who can be induced to believe this had you, without any profit, or even without the greatest profit to yourself, disregarded the great disgrace, the great danger to your position as a free man, and to your fortunes, which you were incurring, so far as, though you were daily hearing the groans and complaints of all Sicily, Hawk, as you yourself have said, you expected to be brought to trial for this. Hawk, the hazard of his present trial is not at all inconsistent with the opinion you yourself had formed, till to allow the cultivators of the soil to be harassed and plundered with circumstances of the most scandalous injustice. In truth, though you are a man of singular cruelty and audacity, still you would be unwilling for a whole province to be alienated from you, or so many most honorable men to be made your greatest enemies, if your desire for money and present booty had not overcome all reason and all consideration of safety. 53. But, O judges, since it is not possible for me to detail to you the sum total and the whole number of his acts of injustice,